So, let's come together now then, please. Okay? Go on there.
I was trying to explain a lot of things to them, but we are talking about several points. One is about the performative contradiction, and we think and I think that the performative contradiction is the possibility of Derrida want to see in the language.
Would you like to refer to us to a page? Which page are you referring to? Quite helpful to do that. Page 3 perhaps at the bottom? 4 lines from the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
I think a lot of points in the word performative contradiction Derrida made here, because one is that he did not believe the division of the action and description. That's one point. And
could you say a bit more about that, please? He doesn't believe in a division of action and description.
Description. That comes from Austin and the Derrida. Like the idea of speech act very much. He often cited in a lot of works in his books. I think it has the performative contradiction has some connection with that idea.
Okay, carry on talking if you would. Or someone respond.
And in here, and he sees some. He does not just wants to protest his idea against some criticism. And on the contrary, he sees some possibility of language in the performative contradiction. Like this way, we can do something and speak. We can speak something and do something in the other at the same time. That's the possibility of language. The language does not have how to say integrity.
Wholeness, yes.
Yes.
Okay, oneness, yes.
So that's the possibility they want to see in the performative contradiction.
Okay, so a performative contradiction, an example of that would be, I am not speaking.
Yeah.
That's a performative contradiction because in saying that, obviously I am speaking, though I said I wasn't, right? So that's the most straightforward sort of level. So if he says I do not speak French, he's engaged in a kind of performative contradiction. That is the suggestion. What you just referred to is J.L. Austin, 1940s, 1950s English philosopher, who Derrida responds to in various ways. And the key to Austin's ideas, really, is that he thought philosophers, especially in the Anglo tradition, were obsessed with talking about propositions and how they correlated with states of affairs in the world. So if I say there are 17 tables in this room, that statement could be verified by checking whether there are that number of tables. It's a matching of the statement with the state of affairs. But a lot of language doesn't do that. Sometimes in saying something, we aren't describing the world, we're doing something. We're not just, it's not a constative or descriptive function, we are doing something in saying something. So if I say, I promise to see you here tomorrow at 9 o'clock, my saying it is the promise. It's not the description of a promise, it is the promise. Or I do in the marriage service, for example, that would be getting married, saying those words. That's a performative utterance. And Austin starts off drawing that distinction, but then he actually says it's not quite as clear cut as he made out when he started. But even when we say things like there are 17 tables in the room, that also, in some minimal way, is doing something in the world. It's a new statement in the world, it's caused you to think about something, it's changed the way this room is in some degree, caused you to think about the tables. Okay, do you want to say some more? So you're saying Derrida complicates this a lot. Can you say the last bit you said, that sometimes we, in saying something, are doing something? I mean, that's just a performative utterance, isn't it?
Contradiction, yeah.
A performative contradiction is when you say something but are doing something else. Yes. And he wants that contradiction.
Yes.
He thinks there's a certain veracity to it. Okay. Okay, thank you. Does anybody want to follow up about that? Yes, Sunny, go on.
Is it kind of his strategy to use this logical concept of performative contradiction to claim his point? Is it like similar way to put like, this is not pipe?
This is not
a pipe. You know the
Magritte.
Yeah, Magritte. Is it like a similar idea to say that this is not pipe?
I don't think so. Do you know the picture she's referring to by René Magritte? And it says this is not a pipe, it's a picture of a pipe. Well, it's not a pipe because it's a picture. That would be the sort of thing that Magritte is playing with. But I think Magritte is going for something which is much more designed to stir a feeling of the absurd. Whereas Derrida is making a point much closer to the way language operates, I think. So he's not inviting that thought of absurdity in the same way. He's saying that the relation with the impossible is internal to the proper organisation, the proper orientation of our language. That's why he likes the contradiction. Anne?
I'm very happy to discover Derrida here. That's a feeling point of view. I really have the feeling in this sentence when you speak about it's impossible to be a monolinguist, etc. But there is he shows a clear division inside of himself, and this is his own existence. And later on, he speaks about language as the most crazy things.
Yes.
So in a way, we could speak about Magritte, this kind of not craziness, but absurdity.
I see. So you would like to push it that way? Yes.
Not really, but I was just thinking about that. But I really understand his words by his own division and the impossibility to be with one language which is your language and one language which is not your language in a way.
So you're tying that specifically to his situation as an Algerian Jew.
Yeah. And in the sentence, I don't know if in the English translation you have it, but in the French transcription you have a bracket in the middle of the sentence, which is written, I am myself, this one, isn't it?
Yes.
And he's putting himself in this sentence, which I think is very powerful.
Okay. Sonny, you wanted to say something. Please don't feel you have to speak just to me. Speak to each other. Right? Do you want to say what?
I withdraw.
Oh, withdraw. Okay. Does anybody want to follow that up? What I'm interested by myself is how far this is peculiar to his situation as an Algerian Jew, and how far it's the human condition more generally. But you want to say something, don't you?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just follow up with you. That is very peculiar. When in this sense, the example of Derrida himself is not that applicable to the others, like ordinary people. But I think these, if I call these extreme cases, still represent some kind of commonality of all human beings, because in this extreme case, it has showcases this commonality, which is make it more apparent, make something that it is there, but we do not aware it. But in this extreme case, the thing suddenly becomes that apparent, and it is something that we all have.
That's brilliantly good. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
and maybe I can say something about our understanding of the most important line of Derrida is, I
Which
only
page?
have just page 1.
Yes.
I only have one language. It is not mine, the most famous one. So we understand that why we only have one language. Well, it is possible that you can speak all the other languages. You can be multilingual, but still you speak only one language, because there's only one language that you like to call it your home, that you like to have some kind of attachment. This sense of belonging is only one, but it is not yours, because you want to have this sense of belonging, but you do not have this sense of belonging. This is like your home, but it is not your home. You are homeless because you can't understand all that is about this language, because you do not create yourself. It is not yours. It is existed even before your existence, and it survives you. It exceeds you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as you said earlier on, you feel it can't say what you want to say.
Yeah.
But which is as much as to say that you can't
Yeah.
find words for what you're feeling. You can't
Yeah.
those feelings aren't articulated, aren't shaped in some way.
Because it's imposed upon you.
Yeah.
Language is, as I understand, can be said as a set of symbols which make into kind of system. So this is something that you cannot conquer. You cannot master yourself. That's why you say it is not yours. And still, you do not have this sense of belonging. This is not your home.
Yes.
But you want to have this sense of belonging. That's why you say, I have this one home.
Okay, thank you. Is that about this out, Gloria?
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, it's this we were sharing this point exactly this line where we were talking about. And also it's our language, but I use this word like maybe it's not the appropriate word, like we borrow when we birth the language. When I mean borrow, it's a conscious act, but a child doesn't do that. Because it's not conscious way, but in some sense it's a tool, the only way we have to communicate to the other, even which is not really appropriate, because as I say, not every time we are able to communicate through words what we want, what we feel.
Yes, okay, thank you. The idea that you can't communicate what you feel, I think it can be taken two ways. One would be that there are feelings, called ABC, that are already inside you, but you can't find the words in the language that's current that will express that ABC. But the other, and that's frustrating, the other is that you have the feeling, you have the belief that there are feelings inside you that can't be communicated, but they're not even ABC. They don't have a life yet until they've found expression. I'm not saying there's nothing there, but there's a kind of inarticulability. And we can, I think, deceive ourselves into thinking that there are ready-made feelings. It's more unformed than that. So it sort of comes out of the darkness, and it comes into the light by being in some ways forced into this language, which sometimes feels fully easy, fully where we feel at home, and sometimes we don't. Does that fit with what you're saying or not?
Yeah, and I don't know if, for me this is not really clear about, when we speak about languages, is it only related to words, or all the things are part of
Everything,
language?
yes. Gesture.
Gesture,
Yes,
yes,
music and so on.
because in my interview, many people, in my research, and many people use gesture in order to state what they want to mean. Gesture are more effective than words. And also they use gesture in order to shape the face after.
Sure.
From gesture we can understand better
Yes.
what they want to say, what they want to
And
express.
our behaviour in this is very heavily culturally coded as well, and it's
Absolutely.
manifestly, it's learned.
Absolutely.
It's not something that you just do
Yes.
naturally. I'm doing it now, aren't
Yes.
I? So all these things are coded and shaped in some way that we learn how to do them. But I think the same principles that we described there apply to gesture, or to music as well, or to painting and so on, as they do to languages.
I'm not referring to music, I'm referring
No,
in general.
Okay. No, I agree with you.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something?
I just found it a bit difficult to get these two seemingly different kind of ideas. So one is that what you just described, we sometimes feel something inside, but we can't find the words to describe it. And then another idea would be that everything, every thought and every feelings we have are shaped by language.
I think the second thing is always true. There's always some shaping that goes on with language. It's sometimes put rather hyperbolically that there's a violence in language, because the violence works through the classifications, categorizations that language uses, which chops up our experience of the world in ways that is arbitrary in some degree. Not totally arbitrary, but partially arbitrary, which is one reason why we get these cultural differences. But the thing I was trying to get to is that if we say there's something inside me that I cannot put into words, then one way of interpreting that is that there are all of these private sensations which I know very clearly myself, private thoughts, private sensations, and I just can't find the vocabulary in English or French or whatever it is. And another way of saying it is that I feel there's something I want to say, but I'm kind of in the dark as to what it is. I can't find any private way of articulating it either. If I could articulate it privately, I'd be using the words that I would other use in speaking publicly. So there's a very powerful sense that there's something in you that you cannot bring to the surface. The fantasy is to think that you know what that thing is. Do you see what I mean? As though we had private insight into these thoughts and feelings. What's probably much closer to the truth is that there's a sort of darkness there, something that's not yet formed. Do you see what I mean? So if you're writing an essay and you think, I know what I want to say, I just can't find the words to say it, you're probably deceiving yourself. Because it's the very words that do articulate what you want to say, that are the thing you want to say. There isn't the gap. Okay. Does it make a bit more sense? Okay.
So could we say like Derrida's extreme case in his identity or that his language is a metonym of the aspect of language that we can...
Yeah, that's exactly the point you made,
Yes.
that it's actually the human condition. And if you are brought up just in one culture, speaking one language, perhaps not even learning a foreign language, you can feel this very, very strange. You perhaps feel it's very remote from you. But I think what he tries to show is that even in one's native language, one's mother tongue, already this kind of disturbance is there. There's already a kind of not at homeness in that language. And of course the language is always being penetrated and exposed to other languages. And that language, even if it's French or Japanese that have been standardized to a considerable extent, even if it's those languages, there are still many variations, regional variations and so on.
So could we make this, could we make a link to this active division that he used in chapter 2?
Where's chapter 2? Do you want to show us the page?
Page 8.
Yes, okay. Fifth line. So he's quoting Katibi, I think,
Yes.
isn't he? Yes.
And I wasn't really sure about the way that he put the jealousy. That the language appears into jealousy and it becomes kind of madness and amnesia. The way it's linked with the active division. And I wasn't really sure even what divide. And Jacques helped me between the mother tongue and the other, or the called foreign. And I thought I understood this active division by itself, but I couldn't really make a connection with this jealousy part and the madness part, and in the mother tongue and amnesia.
Okay,
And
so
that paragraph after the quotation.
okay. Perhaps some people don't know what anamnesia is. It's a word, Greek word that comes in Plato's dialogue, the Meno in particular, when Socrates is talking to this person called Meno. And it's a doctrine about learning. It's very central to education, really. And the learning that Plato cares about is not knowing that Paris is the capital of France. It's not mere factual information about the world. It's stuff like knowing that the angles inside a triangle add up to 180 degrees. And what Socrates demonstrates with Meno is that even though this person has not been educated, by a process of questioning, he can reason through the properties of the triangle or other things in geometry. So it naturally unfolds from within. So anamnesis is, amnesia is forgetfulness, isn't it, or not being able to remember, amnesia. Anamnesia is the opposite of not being able to remember. It is remembering, it's recalling. So when you realise that there are 180 degrees inside the triangle, it's not like you've discovered some new fact out there, like Paris is the capital of France. What you've realised is something that was kind of already there within the logic of the triangle and so on. So it's a kind of process of recollection. It's a whole doctrine of how we grow, how we learn. But it's rather extreme, of course, but this is what's being referred to. Jacques, can you explain it all for us, please? She said you could, she promised. Can you, not amnesia, the division thing, I mean.
Oh,
talk about the division thing.
But you know what, I wasn't familiar with the term amnesia,
Okay.
and I read it as amnesia.
Okay, so the privative prefix, like atypical, is non-typical, and it acquires the end because of the vowel, and amnesia.
And I can tell you about the error I made and how that actually is useful for thinking about what you've just said.
All right.
So I was thinking about, because you mentioned this earlier, that sometimes we think of writing as being the opposite of
Speech.
of speech, yeah, and maybe a calcification of the process of thought because it's fixed in one
Yes,
particular
calcification is turning into chalk, hardening.
yeah, so the hardening and calcification and of maybe thought or language becoming fixed at one point rather than open to
Yes.
the kind of changes, transformation that we've been discussing. And of course, if I'd read it as amnesia, it might have been something like that. But once now I'm thinking about amnesia, actually it's the opposite. That there's there's this process of drawing out that there's a possibility in writing.
Okay. Okay. So the division. Can you explain that? The division.
Oh, so I would have thought, but you probably need to correct me on this, but I would have thought that the division is between the mother tongue on the one hand, which is the thing that potentially appears natural to you, and the opposite of that, which would be the language of the other potentially,
Yes.
or those from outside of that practice. And that division is active because it's performative to a certain extent, and is exclusive in terms of setting up relations between the praxis within the mother tongue and then outside of that.
Good. And it's active and performative in the sense that people say the language of the school will be French or will be English, and that suppresses the Arabic that people might speak in the streets. Or later on he talks about the fact that he could have studied Arabic at school, but in fact it was available on the curriculum, but there was a subtle pressure not to do it. So those kinds of things. And probably you've experienced, some of you would have experienced something like that. Maybe you get it here too, don't you? Because, I mean, you're engaged in a theoretical inquiry, but it's being assumed you'll write it in English. And we probably can't teach you if you don't do it in English. So there's no malign intention there, but it still has the effect of a division, doesn't it? You're prevented from writing, many of you, in your mother tongue.
And
Go on. Just speak if you want to, okay? Anybody?
And how do we find from this active division? Did I see the division that in my mind and with my attitude toward English, that I can understand that division from my mother tongue, then why it comes active division, and how this active division becomes jealous?
Okay, well, so the first part is easy. It's what I just said, I think, that you're told when you come here you've got to write your dissertation in English, and you have to write your proposal in English. If you'd done it in Korean, we wouldn't have considered you. So there's an operation of power there. It's not, it's not maleficent, but it's not designed to harm you, but nevertheless it is an extension of the power of English, and of course it means you go on to write in English yourself. It's part of that world domination by English. So how's it jealous? Can you show me the lines, please?
So the first paragraph, like 7 lines down, 6 lines
On
down.
page 8.
On page 8, in this place of jealousy that I find. So I assume that jealousy is described in the previous sentence. And there was something like recollects one troubles oneself and one goes in search of history and affiliation. And in the place of jealousy, in this place that is divided between visions and the resentment in this body are fascinated by its own division. So before any other memory writing. So I mean, I want to say like this active division seems to suggest like a mother tongue and the other. I think active division is light on the between speech and writing. I wanted it to.
Well, there's a parallel, isn't there, between
Yes,
speech and writing?
yes. I want, yeah.
Okay, it's very important to think you don't see division as something that just separates two things and then it's fixed. It's not like this. This is an ongoing, dynamic, power-ridden process, really. Just ask yourselves how you experience it. I mean, some of you are native speakers of English, but most are not. So, for example, do you feel some competition with other people when we're talking in English? Do you want to get it right?
No.
You don't. That's right. You don't feel any competition like that.
No.
I can remember going to university and speaking in a way specific to East London, and then going to a sort of elite British university and discovering that actually that I couldn't speak in that way and be taken seriously. And there's on the one hand there's the impetus to change, but at the same there's a resentment in that because you're aware of the hierarchisation and your positionality within it, even though you still have agency. And that's maybe where the jealousy comes a little bit, the awareness of.
Also, in the form of writing, I think it's expressed that the kind of your resentment of this part of your speech and your mother tongue that comes. I mean, what I want to say is that the kind of link that he's making a point to be the form of writing and autobiography and its relation to speech with mother tongue. I'm sorry, I just.
It's complicating it a bit. So I'd like you to just say that a little bit more if you want to. This, of course, is the wonderful English class system we have. So could you just expand on it just a
I
little
would
bit?
say elitist rather than elite university. An elitist university. So, the jealousy to a certain extent is that as you say, the structure of the class system in the UK was revealed.
Because they talk posh and you didn't, basically.
But I suppose that's not the problem, but it's the not seeing the different ways of speaking with equal dignity. Because as soon as they're not seeing an equal dignity, then of course there's this hierarchisation.
Yes.
You realise that one form of speaking and the associated ways of performing and being in the world are those forms that are most likely to help the group to which that cultural practice belongs, to get power and to get on in the world, and therefore things are easier because of that, and therefore for someone who's not doing that, it's less easy. So that's why I think the jealousy might come from.
Okay, so you want to be able to speak like them in order to be able to operate with them and have more influence and so on, and at the same time you resent the fact you have to do that?
Maybe not want to, but maybe see the necessity, or maybe see the injustice in, or maybe just not go that far, just have the structure, the hierarchical structure revealed, and in that image is some form of a lowering of self-esteem.
Okay.
That might be registered.
What is very clear is it's an uncomfortable thing, isn't it? There's a disturbance running all through this. So I was trying to see if you felt this. I mean, that's just within English, if that's one language. I was trying to see if you felt this in other ways, in your own experience of being in an Anglophone culture. Go on then.
I like to use my own example of being Chinese. When I speak Chinese, you don't have that kind of thing. But of course, I know that when I speak English, I of course I'm very sensitive of my way of speaking. Yeah, because I know it very clearly in English background, certain way of speaking is also a label of certain kind of class that you are in, certain kind of education that you received. But when I speak Chinese, I do not have this conscious at all, because you can be in any class in Chinese and you can speak any kind of accent. So I think it's very different, two languages. Because English, the way you speak English and the accent you carry is also something about your social status. But in Chinese, it is not. So the Derrida, when he's speaking of this division between the two languages, does he mean that kind of social status and hierarchical dimension in it? Or if in the example of the other language, it doesn't have that layer or dimension?
I think it has multiple layers. Anne will have a better idea than I do, but I mean, one is that having grown up in Algeria, that would be a factor, exposed to Arabic in the streets and having friends who spoke Arabic, with them. A Jewish subculture, again, that would have a bearing. Regional accents in France have a bit, are seen in different ways. And then, of course, when he's in his late teens, he goes to Paris, and that's where he spends the rest of his career. Do you want to say anything about that? I'm just.
I think.
Okay, go first then.
Yeah, in terms of Arabic language, I think there is no way to show from which class you are coming.
Is there not?
Yeah, but you can tell from the language that from the accent, from which city maybe, but not from which class.
Okay.
But if you by choosing the words it will show how educated you are. Yeah?
Okay.
If you are using simple words or
Yeah.
more complicated, that's it. But
Okay.
not. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I can't. Would you please say more about the?
Well,
how
an
you
example
say-
like
in English, how
yes.
could you tell if someone come from higher class? How could you?
It's all sorts of factors, but it's intonation, and then when someone says a little bit more, the structures they're using, the way words are pronounced, all those things. So, I mean, David Beckham, I suppose, is someone you would know, and when you hear him speak, you already have very strong messages about where he comes from, the East End of London, and the kind of class background he would have. I'm sure his language has changed because, of course, he's a super celebrity. But he still retained that quite a lot, I think, don't you? That same accent, to his credit. You know? And I hate to say it, but you know his father's not a brain surgeon. Well, that's all right, isn't it? Yeah. So there's all sorts of assumptions you can make on this basis. And I really don't say that with any snobbery, but it's just there written into the language. You can hear it very clearly. In France, I think there's another factor that operates in that I believe French culture is very Paris-centred. So that if you live in Avignon in the south, then it's very much out in the provinces. That applies here to some extent, but not to the same extent. In Japan, I think it applies less again. Do you think that's fair? It's very Paris-centred or not? I don't know where you come from.
Not from Paris.
Right.
Yeah. I think there is a lot about colonialism beyond the line here, and when we speak about revenge, and
Yes,
when
right.
he speaks about violence,
Yes.
so it seems that he collects all this violence
Yes,
and makes the language as a response to that, and
Yes.
the writing.
Yes, okay. Yes. Could we just vary it a little bit? Does someone on the back table want to say something? Matthew, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to. Can you say anything about this in relation to Indian languages, in relation to English? Because there the connection with English is rather different.
I think I sort of, for me this sort of, well, I have several languages, and I've never ever thought that there was anything. I've always envied those who have had very strong partnerships, or what seemed to be very sort of strong partnerships with their languages. Because I never had this sort of sense of belonging, because I grew up in Singapore, which is basically the idea that everyone's an immigrant, more or less, and we don't have a strong sense of origin. So our historicity is very sort of weak in the sense that it's like starting from a blank slate, and communication there is mainly it's sort of a very pragmatic thing. So, so I grew up with like 2 languages, but I would not say that I never met the standards of those languages in one way or another. So when I went to India, and I had to speak my mother tongue, which is Tamil, it was never good enough for them. They would always make fun of my Tamil. In fact, in Singapore, it's sort of odd because I sounded like I had an Indian sort of Tamil because my parents spoke an Indian version of the Tamil, not the Singaporean version, and likewise for my English. So,
And that's one way of them securing their position, isn't it, as proper Tamil speakers or proper English speakers? Or
yeah,
whatever.
I mean, there was always an expectation, I think, that I could never fulfill. But for me, I've gotten over this sort of complexity, I guess. And I think this is a natural flair.
Okay, so you could say something like he says, couldn't you, that you only speak one language and you don't ever speak one language. Could you say that? Or not? Or do you feel you speak 2 or 3 languages and they're discrete? That's what I'm interested by. Or
I
do
think
they?
I have several of these languages interweave. Sometimes they sort of interweave. So I might, if I'm speaking English now, of course it comes with these other languages that I might have heard and the expressions that get sort of infused into the sort of language of English. But yeah, it's never. Yeah, it's never. I've sort of never had to sort of confine by the sense of a pure form.
And is there sometimes a running together of thought that within a sentence you go from one language to another and it sort of blends quite happily? And
yeah, I think it happens with humour especially. I think.
yes.
Humour is always very interesting because I think humour is the one time where I've felt that sort of. Yeah, I can say that this moment is mine. Like this moment expression in which either I've heard something funny or when I engage in a sort of wit with someone, I can say that, yeah, there's some sort of familiarity with that. I don't feel sort of this alienation. I feel alienation all the time otherwise. So I think humor for me is that sort of therapy which I can then,
Okay. Does anybody over here want to raise something? Right?
I guess what Jacques was saying about his accent, I feel that way when I come to the UK as well, because I obviously speak English as my first language, but I think immediately when people realize I'm American, there's a connotation that comes with that, just like when you come from East London, maybe there's a connotation that comes with that as well. So it's just interesting to see that it happens within your own country, but it also happens between countries that speak the same language, that there's a different, yeah.
Where'd you come from?
From California, Southern
Oh, you said that,
California.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just a very quick one. I think it also relates with how do you perceive your identity and how comfortable you are with this identity that you give yourself.
How comfortable?
Yes.
Yes.
If you
Yes.
are comfortable and then you won't care about things like that.
Just one thing about the colonialization and the identity. I just researched about Vietnam, which were colonized by French, not in the past. But once there, some Vietnamese people should have some kind of prestige if they can speak in French, obviously, and especially in a rural area or some place. And sometimes they try to take advantage of their chance or the status, the fact they were colonized and they were just taught in French. Then they can even say we are the nation where we can speak French.
Okay.
So it's also just depends on the situation, environment where how you feel comfortable about your language which you are using.
Okay, so this means that the way the language plays out
Yes.
reiterates the power relations that
Yes.
were there before in the very way Franz Fanon said they would do. Yeah. That's okay. Okay. Do you want to say anything more? No? Sonny, you wanted to say some more? No? Marianne?
I was just thinking about his experience about language in different classes. In Rio, there's the thing that the people who live in favelas in the slums, they speak quite
Just explain what that means, would you please, in Rio? What is a favela?
Oh my gosh, that's so okay, so where, people who are poor, they live normally in hills, and they live all together with the ones that have more resources, because Rio is very atypical city. We've got many hills, and people live in the downside. They tend to be more rich than the ones that live in hills, but they share the same space. And there's the thing about language. So when there's the drug traffic in the favelas, people that they create a specific code of language to get away, because the police is trying to call them up, and they create different forms of language to communicate. But what ends up happening is that people who are middle class, they get quite jealous with this mobility that they have in creating new words and meanings. So it's quite cool for an educated person, middle class, to borrow some of these terms created by the drug dealers and people living in favelas, and incorporate. But the thing is, there is a distinction. You don't speak like them. You just borrow a certain kind of words and make them cool, and to incorporate into the
That's
more.
There's an example at that same religious university is sort of public school boys borrowing the language of hip hop, which is cool. But if I'd done that marked as I am as coming from a certain place, that wouldn't be cool. The kind of combination of factors. But can I return to your point about being comfortable in your own skin?
Of your identity.
Of your identity. I wonder if it maybe is a little bit more complex than that, in the sense that you can be comfortable within the integrity of your own identity, but you might still have it revealed to you that that isn't accepted by others. And it's in the injustice of that non-acceptance that maybe where the resentment and the jealousy comes from. And if maybe I can extend it out of language to maybe other forms, other symbols, if we think of people who are marked in a certain way, such as maybe a woman in France wearing a headscarf, she might be marked in a certain way and viewed in a certain way because of maybe not her spoken language, but the substance of her life. She might be viewed in a certain way as being an other, which excludes her from the mainstream and excludes her access to certain objects, which might make her resentful therefore. And she might be very comfortable in it, and she may even because of the ultimatum that's often offered to her, sort of, I was going to say retreat, that's one word, but sort of strengthen and build on her Islamic culture even more in response to the rejection that maybe mainstream society has given her. So she's very comfortable in it, but there still might be a resentment in there of that process of othering that's being done because she's marked as different.
Yes, but I'm thinking that the comfortableness of this identity you want to create yourself is also a kind of mediation or interaction with how you like to be perceived by others, how you like others to see your identity. But I think what you're saying is right, but I'm thinking this perspective. Because identity is not only about how you feel about yourself, it's also about how you like to be seen by others. So there's a kind of interaction or mediation between you yourself and others.
Okay, I think time has finished for speak list, so we're going to stop this today, but of course we'll carry on with more of this text tomorrow, chapters 3 and 4, and then I'm just going to select some parts from the latter part of the book for dealing with on Sunday.